The ledger hit the floor before Nora even realized her fingers had gone slack. She had been standing just outside the drawing room door, accounts book pressed to her chest, when she heard it. Not an argument or a confession, something far worse than either of those things. A conversation between a man completely at ease and a woman whose laughter said she had been there many times before. "She runs the house well," the Duke of Grenwall said, and there was almost something kind in his voice. Almost. But you cannot expect a man to feel anything looking at old cargo. It keeps, but does not move you. More laughter, soft and unbothered. Nora stood in that corridor for exactly 4 breaths. Then she bent down, picked up the ledger, straightened her back, and walked away without making a single sound. 4 years. 4 years of managing Grenwall estate accounts to the last shilling. 4 years of greeting his guests, covering his errors in the household books, and saying nothing when the whispers in town grew louder about the woman he kept in Whitmore Lane. And he had the nerve to call her old cargo. She had a name. She had a mind sharper than half the men who sat at his dinner table. And tonight, something in her that had been waiting, patient and quiet, finally stopped waiting. "Now, tell me something before we go further. Do you think Nora walked out of Grenwall Estate that same night, or did she stay and make him pay for it slowly? Drop your answer below and tell me which part of the world you are watching from. I read every single comment, and I will be replying. If this story already has you, subscribe now." Nora Blythe did not sleep that night. She lay on her narrow bed in the east wing of Grenwall Estate, staring at the ceiling, with the ledger still sitting on the small table beside her, and she thought about the word, old cargo. She had arrived at Grenwall 4 years ago, at the age of 22, brought in by the late Duchess Marion herself, who had seen something in Nora during a charity function in Bath, and decided on the spot that she needed someone with a clear head running her household. The Duchess had been warm and direct. She had looked Nora in the eye and said, "I need someone who will tell me the truth about this house, not what sounds polite." Nora had said yes before the week was out. She had loved working for Duchess Marion. That was the honest truth of it. The woman had built something real inside Grenwall, a household that ran with dignity and purpose, staff who were treated as people rather than furniture, accounts that were clean and accounted for down to every last candle ordered from the chandler in town. When the Duchess died 18 months into Nora's tenure, it was a blow that sat heavy on the entire estate for months. And then the Duke came back. Lord Cavendish Grenwall, the 5th Duke of Grenwall, had been abroad for most of the 2 years before his mother's death. There were different stories about why, depending on who in the household you asked. Mr. Potts, the elderly groundskeeper who had been at Grenwall since before the current Duke was born, said the young lord had never been comfortable in his father's shadow and had left the moment the old Duke passed. Mrs. Hale, the cook, said something about a broken arrangement with a family in Edinburgh, though she would never say more than that when she noticed someone listening. Nora had not pressed either of them. It was not her place, and more importantly, it was not relevant to the ledgers. When Cavendish Grenwall walked through the front doors of his estate for the first time with Nora present, she had been standing in the entrance hall going over a supply order with the head footman, Thomas. The Duke had stopped, looked at her, and said, "Who is this?" Not unkindly, but with the particular blankness of a man who had not been told something he expected to be told. Nora had introduced herself, explained her position, and handed him a brief summary of the estate's financial standing that she had prepared 2 days prior in anticipation of his arrival. He had taken the paper, looked at it for a moment, and then looked back at her. "My mother chose well," he said. Then he walked upstairs. That had been their beginning, polite, distant, and functional. He rarely interfered with how she ran the household. She rarely needed him to. They met once a week in the study, to go over accounts. He signed what needed signing, asked occasional questions about the estate farms and the London property, and then the meeting ended. She found him neither warm nor cruel in those early months. He was simply present. But things shifted. slowly, the way things do when you live under the same roof as someone long enough. She noticed that he read late into the night, because the library candles were always burned low by morning. She noticed that he was unfailingly kind to the younger members of staff, the scullery girls, and the stable boy named Kit, who was 14 and still learning his way around the estate. She noticed that he argued with his solicitor, a tight-faced man named Mr. Rowe, with a precision that told her he understood far more about legal matters than he let on in casual company. She also noticed the carriage that appeared on Tuesday evenings without fail, taking him into town and returning him after midnight. She had not let herself think too much about that carriage. It was not her business. She was the estate manager. She managed the estate. But last night, the carriage had not come. Instead, the woman had come to Grenwall. Nora had not known at first. She had been in her office on the ground floor going over the quarterly farm rents when she heard unfamiliar heels on the marble of the entrance hall. She had assumed it was a visiting relation or a social call that Thomas would handle. She had stayed at her desk. An hour later, when she went to retrieve the household ledger from the study shelf, as Mrs. Hale had requested, she had walked into the corridor where sound carried too well through old stone walls, and she had heard everything. Old cargo. She pressed her fingers flat against the bedsheet now and breathed out slowly. The woman's name, she had gathered from the conversation fragments she had not meant to hear, was Cecilia. Not a relation, not a social call. A woman whose laughter was practiced and whose presence in this house was an insult, wrapped in expensive perfume. Nora was not angry about Cecilia's existence. She had known about the Tuesday carriage. What had cut through her was the ease of it, the lightness with which he had said it. Old cargo. She sat up before dawn had properly arrived and began to dress. She had a decision to make, and she was not the kind of woman who made decisions lying down. By the time the kitchen was lit, and Mrs. Hale was directing the scullery girls through the morning bread, Nora was already at her desk, with the estate accounts open and a second document beside them that she had never shown anyone. It was a list she had been building quietly over the past 6 months. Properties she had identified, households in need of an experienced manager, 3 letters she had drafted and not yet sent. She had not been planning to leave. She looked at the 3 letters now and thought about the Duke sleeping upstairs, comfortable, unbothered, and completely unaware that the woman who kept his entire estate from falling into disorder had heard every single word he said last night. Then, she picked up her pen and began to write a 4th letter. The letter was addressed to Lady Merton of Summerfield Park, a widow of considerable means and practical sense, who had written to Nora twice in the past year, requesting her consideration for a household management position. Nora had politely declined both times, citing her commitment to Grenwall. She read both of Lady Merton's previous letters again now, folded neatly, and kept at the back of her correspondence drawer. Then she wrote her reply in clear, measured language. She was available for consideration. She would appreciate a formal meeting at Lady Merton's convenience. She remained, as always, professional. She sealed the letter, set it aside, and went to oversee breakfast. This was the particular discipline of Nora Blythe. She did not let the ground shift beneath her feet while the household was watching. Whatever was moving inside her stayed inside her. The breakfast table was set correctly. The fires were lit in the right rooms. The Morning Post was sorted and placed on the silver tray in the entrance hall, and when the Duke came downstairs at 8:30, everything was exactly as it should be. He looked rested. He paused at the bottom of the stairs when he saw her crossing the hall with the supply inventory under her arm. "Miss Blythe," he said, a simple greeting, the same tone as every other morning. "Your Grace," she replied, with exactly the same courtesy she had used every morning for 4 years. She did not break her stride. She heard him hesitate behind her. It was only a half-second, the smallest pause, but she noticed it because she noticed everything. Then his footsteps continued toward the breakfast room, and the moment passed. She went about her morning. What she did not expect was Lord Frederick Marsden. He arrived at Grenwall just before noon, without prior notice, which was entirely consistent with everything she had been told about the Duke's younger brother. Frederick Marsden was 26, 3 years younger than the Duke, and where Cavendish was contained and careful, Frederick was the opposite. He came through the front doors with his coat half undone and his hat already in the hand of the young footman before Thomas could properly receive it. He was grinning before he was fully inside. "Where is my brother?" he asked Thomas. "In the study, my lord," Thomas said. "And Miss Blythe? Is she still the only person in this house who actually knows where anything is?" Thomas smiled despite himself. "In the east corridor, my lord, I believe." Frederick found her there 3 minutes later, which told her he had not gone to the study first. She was reviewing a repair order for the east garden wall when she heard him coming. His footsteps were never quiet. "Miss Blythe," he said, with genuine warmth that she had learned over the years was entirely real and not performance. "You look well. Are you well?" "I am quite well, Lord Frederick. Thank you for asking." He leaned against the corridor wall with the ease of a man who had grown up in this house and had never lost the habit of treating it as a place where he could breathe freely. He studied her for a moment in that open way he had. "You look like someone who has decided something," he said. Nora glanced at him. "I look like someone reviewing a wall repair estimate." "You can do both," Frederick said, unbothered. "My brother in a foul mood? His Grace seemed perfectly well at breakfast." "He sent me a letter," Frederick said, pulling it from his coat pocket and holding it up briefly before tucking it back. "Very formal, very Cavendish. Something about the northern land boundary dispute with Alderton. He needs me to go up there with Rowe and sort it out before the quarter sessions." He paused. He said nothing else in the letter. You know what that means. Nora said nothing, because she did not know what it meant, and she was not going to pretend she did. "It means," Frederick continued, "that something is wrong, and he has decided to solve it by sending paperwork northward." He looked at her steadily. "Has something happened?" "The estate is running well, Lord Frederick." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once, accepting the boundary she had drawn, without making her feel the weight of it. That was the thing about Frederick Marsden that she had always quietly respected. He pushed, but he never pushed past what was decent. "I am here for 2 days before I go north," he said. "If you need anything before I leave, you will tell me." It was not quite a question. She acknowledged it with a small nod and returned to her papers. He walked away down the corridor, and she listened to his footsteps until they rounded the corner toward the study. She stood still for a moment after he was gone. Frederick did not know what he had walked into. He did not know about the previous night or the corridor or what his brother had said in that easy, careless voice. But his arrival changed the weight of her decision, because Frederick had always been the kind of presence that reminded her why she had stayed at Grenwall as long as she had. Not because of the Duke, because of what this house had been under Duchess Marion, and the fragments of that still living in the staff who had served her, in the way Kit, the stable boy, still left wildflowers on the small stone marker near the garden that the Duchess had loved, in the way Mrs. Hale still made the almond cake the Duchess had preferred every Sunday without being asked. Nora had been keeping something alive here. She had told herself it was professional duty. She understood now, in the hard, clear light of this morning, that it had been something more personal than that, and that was its own kind of problem. She folded the repair estimate, tucked it under her arm, and walked back toward her office. She passed the drawing room on the way. The door was fully closed now. The room had been aired and tidied that morning by the housemaid, Agnes, who had said nothing about what she may or may not have noticed the previous evening. Agnes was 19, and sensible beyond her years. Nora had always appreciated that about her. She stopped outside the drawing room door for just a moment. One breath. Then she moved on. At 2:30, the Duke sent for her. She gathered the weekly account summary she had prepared and went to the study. He was standing at the window when she entered, which was unusual. He normally sat at the desk. She placed the accounts on the desk and waited. He turned from the window. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize, which was also unusual, because she had learned his expressions over 4 years, the way you learn the weather patterns of a place you live in. "I want to discuss the Alderton boundary matter before Frederick leaves," he said. "There are records in the East Archive room that Rowe will need. Can you locate them today?" "Yes, Your Grace," she said. He nodded. Then he looked at the account summary she had placed on the desk, but did not pick it up. "Is everything in order this week?" "Everything is in order." He looked at her for a half-second longer than necessary. That was all. Then he looked back at the window. "Thank you, Miss Blythe." She left the study, walked back down the corridor, and only when she reached her own office and closed the door behind her did she allow herself to press the back of her hand briefly against her mouth. He had no idea. He had spoken those words last night and went to sleep and woken up this morning and came to his study and sent for her to find his archive records, and he had absolutely no idea that she had heard him. He was going to go on exactly as he had always gone on, comfortable and unaware, and she was going to go on finding his archive records and managing his accounts and being old cargo in the East Wing until she decided otherwise. She sat at her desk. She pulled the letter to Lady Merton toward her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and placed it carefully inside. Not because she had changed her mind, because she needed to be certain, before she walked out of Grenwall Estate, that she understood exactly what she was walking away from, and what, if anything, she was going to do about the Duke of Grenwall first. The archive room smelled of old paper and beeswax, and Nora had always found it oddly comforting. She located the Alderton boundary records within 20 minutes, 3 leather-bound folders tucked behind the estate survey maps from the previous century. She carried them to the study, left them on the desk with a handwritten index of their contents, and returned to her office without seeing the Duke again. What she found waiting on her desk was not something she had expected. A note, written on paper that was too fine for any member of the household staff to own, in handwriting that slanted deliberately to the right, the way handwriting does when someone has been taught to make it look elegant rather than clear. The wording was brief and entirely without greeting. "The household arrangements will need to change. I suggest we speak before the end of the week. I know where your office is." No signature. None was needed. Nora read it twice. Then she set it flat on her desk, placed her paperweight on top of it, and sat down. Cecilia had not left. She had assumed, after the previous night, that the woman would have been discreetly returned to Whitmore Lane by morning. That was how these arrangements worked in houses like Grenwall. The woman existed in town. She did not exist inside the estate walls in daylight, where the staff could see her and form opinions and carry those opinions into the village when they went to market. It was an unspoken rule of the world Nora operated in, and the Duke, whatever else he was, understood how that world functioned. Except Cecilia was still here, and she was sending notes to the estate manager's office. Nora picked up the note, walked down the corridor, and knocked on Mrs. Hale's kitchen door. Mrs. Hale was a broad, practical woman in her 50s, who had been cooking at Grenwall since before the current Duke's first tooth. She knew everything that moved inside these walls. She turned from the stove when Nora entered and read the situation in Nora's face, the way only someone who had known her for 4 years could. "She asked Agnes to bring her breakfast in the Rose guest room this morning," Mrs. Hale said, before Nora had opened her mouth. "I sent it because I did not know what else to do." Agnes came back, looking like she had swallowed something sideways. "Did she speak to Agnes?" "Gave her a list," Mrs. Hale said, with a particular flatness. "Fresh flowers in the room daily. A specific tea she requires brought up at 10. And she asked Agnes who manages the household accounts." Mrs. Hale looked at Nora directly. "Agnes told her." Nora nodded slowly. "I don't like this," Mrs. Hale said. She was not someone who wasted words on feelings, which meant that when she expressed one plainly, it carried weight. "Neither do I," Nora said. She tucked the note into her pocket and went to find Thomas. Thomas had been head footman at Grenwall for 11 years and had served under 3 different household configurations. He was 43, quietly efficient, and fiercely loyal to the estate. He was in the entrance hall, directing the young footman, Samuel, on the correct positioning of the afternoon flower arrangements, when Nora found him. She pulled him aside and told him, in low and direct language, what the note contained and where it had come from. Thomas's expression did not change significantly, but his jaw tightened. "She walked through the kitchen corridor this morning," he said. "I saw her myself. She was looking at things." "What kind of things?" "The way people look at things they are measuring," Thomas said. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nothing changes in this household without my instruction, or the Duke's direct order. Pass that to every member of staff today." Quietly, Nora went back to her office, sat down, and thought clearly and carefully about what was happening. Cecilia was not simply a woman the Duke was fond of. She was making a move. The note, the breakfast list, the measuring look through the kitchen corridor, these were not the actions of someone content to be a quiet guest. This was a woman who had decided that Grenwall was going to become something other than what it currently was, and she had started with the household staff, because that was where practical power in a great house lived. Not in the Duke's study, in the kitchen, in the linen room, in the hands of the people who made everything run. She understood that, which meant she was not careless, which meant this required more careful handling than Nora had initially given it. She picked up her pen and did not write to Lady Merton. She wrote instead to a woman named Mrs. Portia Oldwell, who was a solicitor's widow in Bath, with an extraordinary gift for finding out things that were not publicly known. Nora had helped Mrs. Oldwell manage a small property dispute 2 years ago through a mutual connection, and the woman had since become a reliable, discreet correspondent. The letter asked only one question, phrased with careful indirection. It asked whether the name Cecilia Vance meant anything in the social or legal landscape of the past 3 years, in connection with any estate matter or family arrangement in the southern counties. She sealed it and sent it with the afternoon post before she could second-guess herself. By evening, the house had shifted in the way houses shift when something unseen is moving through them. The staff spoke in shorter sentences. Agnes avoided the upper corridor, where the Rose guest room sat. Even Kit, who rarely came inside the house proper, came to Nora's office at 5 o'clock, on the thin pretense of asking about the feed order, and stood in the doorway looking unsettled until she asked him plainly what he had seen. "A carriage came in the back," he said. "Not the Duke's. Different livery. 2 trunks carried up the side stairs." Nora looked at him steadily. "Thank you, Kit." He nodded and left, and she sat with that information and understood that Cecilia Vance was not planning to leave by morning after all. She was planning to stay. At dinner that evening, the Duke dined alone in the formal dining room, which was his usual preference when there were no guests. Except there was a guest, and the guest dined with him. Nora knew this because Agnes came to find her at 7:30, with an expression that mixed personal outrage with professional confusion. "She came down to dinner," Agnes said. In the formal dining room, Thomas seated her because the Duke gave no instruction otherwise, and she simply sat down. Nora closed the account book she had been working through. "Did the Duke appear surprised?" Agnes hesitated. "He appeared," she said carefully, as though he had expected it. Nora thanked her and sent her back to her duties, and sat alone in her office for a long moment, with the particular stillness of someone who has just watched a door close on something they cannot retrieve. He had known. He had not told her. He had sent for her today to find archive records, and looked at her with that unreadable expression, and said nothing about a guest who was moving trunks into the upper rooms and sending notes to the estate manager about household changes. Old Cargo did not get informed. Old Cargo managed the records and the repair orders and the farm rents, and was not consulted about anything that actually mattered. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and walked to the formal dining room. She knocked once and opened the door. The Duke looked up from his plate. Cecilia, seated to his left in the chair that had been Duchess Marion's during formal family dinners, turned and looked at Nora with an expression of mild, practiced amusement. She was striking in the way that women are when they have spent a great deal of time and money making themselves precisely that. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a smile that knew exactly how much it unsettled people. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace," Nora said, looking only at the Duke. "I have a household matter requiring your direct instruction this evening, when you are available." Cavendish Grenwall looked at her. Then he looked briefly at Cecilia. Then he set down his fork and said, "After dinner, Miss Blythe." "Of course," Nora said. She looked for exactly 1 second at Cecilia. Then she withdrew and closed the door quietly behind her. She went back to her office and waited. He came at 9 o'clock. The study fire had been lit by Samuel an hour earlier, and the room was warm. Nora stood near the desk rather than sitting, because she had decided before he arrived that this was not going to be a meeting where she looked up at him from a chair. He came in without ceremony, closed the door, and stood on the other side of the desk, looking at her with an expression she still could not fully read. "What is the household matter?" he asked. "Miss Vance received breakfast in the Rose guest room this morning," Nora said. "She sent a note to this office, stating that household arrangements would need to change, and requesting a meeting with me before the end of the week. 2 trunks arrived by the side stairs this evening. She dined with you in the formal dining room, in the chair your mother used during family meals." She paused. "I need your instruction, Your Grace, on how you would like me to manage this arrangement, because at present I have none, and your staff are managing it without direction." The Duke said nothing for a moment. He looked at the desk. Then he said, "Miss Vance is a guest of this house." "For how long?" Something moved across his face. Not guilt precisely. Something more uncomfortable than guilt. "That has not been decided." Nora held his gaze. "Your Grace, with respect, your household cannot function without clarity on who holds authority within it. If Miss Vance intends to give direction to the staff, I need to know that. If she does not, I need to be able to tell her so on your behalf. No one is replacing your authority here, Miss Blythe." "Then may I have that in writing?" He looked at her sharply. She looked back at him with complete steadiness and waited. The fire crackled behind her. Somewhere above them, footsteps crossed the upper floor, light and deliberate, the particular step of someone who was not trying to be quiet, so much as trying to be heard. The Duke picked up the pen from his desk, pulled a sheet of paper toward him, and wrote 4 sentences. He signed it, dusted it, and held it out to her. She took it, read it without expression, and folded it. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. She was at the door when he spoke again. "Miss Blythe." She stopped, but did not turn immediately. 1 breath. Then she turned. He was standing with one hand resting on the desk, and something in his face that she had not seen before in 4 years. "The estate," he said. "It runs well, because of you. I want you to know, I understand that." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Good night, Your Grace," and walked out. She did not feel the warmth he had perhaps intended in those words. She felt, instead, the particular coldness of a compliment that arrives too late and says the wrong thing while meaning to say something better. He understood that she ran the estate well. That was what he valued, the running of the estate, the cargo in good condition. She went to her room and did not sleep well again. What woke her at 11:30 was not a sound from inside the house. It was Frederick. He knocked on her door with 3 sharp raps that were nothing like the Duke's measured knock, and everything like the slightly urgent energy Frederick Marsden carried everywhere. She opened the door in her dressing gown to find him standing in the corridor with a candle and an expression that was entirely serious for the first time since his arrival. "She went into the archive room," he said without preamble. Nora stared at him. "When?" 20 minutes ago. "I was coming down for a book from the library, and I saw a light under the archive room door. I thought it was you, so I knocked," she answered. He paused. She had 2 of the estate folders open on the reading table. Nora moved past him immediately. They went down the back stairs together quickly, and without speaking. The archive room door was closed when they reached it, and when Nora opened it, the room was empty. But 2 folders had not been replaced correctly on the shelf. She could see it immediately. The way you see disorder in a space you have organized yourself. She went to the shelf and checked them. Both were from the section containing Grenwall property deeds and the legal records of the estate's land holdings. She stood very still for a moment. She was not reading them out of curiosity, Frederick said from the doorway. "No," Nora agreed. He came into the room and stood beside her at the shelf. He was quiet, in a way he rarely was. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "She arrived last night," Nora said. "That is not what I am asking." He looked at her with his direct, uncomplicated gaze. "How long has my brother been making decisions about this house that he has not told you about?" She considered the question honestly. "There have always been things that were not my business to know," she said. "The estate records are your business," Frederick said flatly. He took the two misplaced folders, looked at what they contained, and then looked at her. "Nora, these are the deed transfers, the inheritance documentation. If anyone wanted to understand how to challenge the current structure of Grenwall's holdings, or find a weakness in the title, they would start exactly here." She took the folders from him and replaced them precisely. Then she locked the archive room for the first time since she had taken the key 4 years ago and put the key in the pocket of her dressing gown. "I received a letter this afternoon," Frederick said as they walked back toward the stairs. "Not from my brother, from our cousin, Lord Gerald Hart, in London. He has heard that Cecilia Vance is at Grenwall." He paused on the bottom stair. Gerald is not someone who writes letters for pleasant reasons. What did he say? He asked whether Cavendish was intending to be a fool about this woman publicly, or only privately, Frederick said, with the bluntness of a younger brother who had long since stopped softening things. He also said that Miss Vance was involved in a property matter in Hampshire 2 years ago that ended badly for the family involved. He did not say how badly. Nora thought of Mrs. Aldwell in Bath, and the letter she had sent that afternoon, and understood that she was not the only one who had started pulling at threads. "Your cousin should come to Grenwall," she said. Frederick looked at her with something close to surprise. She had never, in 4 years, made a suggestion that touched the Duke's personal or family affairs. "He should come here," she said again, "soon, before the end of the week." Frederick studied her face in the dim light of the corridor. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. Once, without asking the question, she could see forming behind his eyes. "I will write to him in the morning," he said. She thanked him and went back upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed with the archive key in her hand and thought about Cecilia Vance moving through these corridors at night, with lamplight falling across estate deed transfers, and she thought about the Duke standing in the study, saying the estate runs well because of you, as though that ought to be enough. And she thought about Duchess Marion, who had looked her in the eye and said, "Tell me the truth about this house." She was telling the truth about this house now, to herself, which was the harder telling. She did not want to simply leave Grenwall. She wanted to understand why a woman with Cecilia Vance's apparent history was inside this house at all, and what exactly the Duke of Grenwall knew about her that he was choosing not to say, and whether the man who had been kind to a 14-year-old stable boy and read books until the candles burned down had any idea whatsoever that someone was sitting in his archive room at midnight, reading his deed transfers. She thought he did not. She thought that was the most dangerous thing of all. Lord Gerald Hart arrived at Grenwall on Thursday morning in a carriage that announced itself before it reached the gates. Gerald was 41, broad-shouldered, and possessed of the particular confidence of a man who had navigated London society long enough to know exactly where everybody was buried and approximately how deep. He was not warm the way Frederick was warm. He was useful, which was an entirely different thing. Nora was in the entrance hall when he arrived, not by accident. He looked at her the moment Thomas opened the door and said, without introduction, "You are Miss Blythe." It was not a question. He had done his reading. "My lord," she said, "Frederick wrote that you suggested I come." He handed his coat to Samuel without looking at him. "I have been trying to get someone to suggest that for 3 days. Tell me what you know about this woman." She told him everything. Gerald listened without interrupting, which told her he was more serious about this than his letter to Frederick had suggested. When she finished, she handed him Mrs. Aldwell's reply. He read it standing in the entrance hall with his traveling gloves still in his hand. Then he read it again. His expression did not shift dramatically. It settled, the way a man's expression settles when something he suspected is confirmed, and the confirmation is worse than he hoped. Hampshire, he said. Yes. The Fenwick estate. He looked up at her. Do you know what happened there? Mrs. Aldwell says a widower. A house in good order. Within 8 months of Miss Vance's arrival as a guest, the household accounts were redirected through a secondary agent the widower had not appointed himself. The estate solicitor raised a concern. He was replaced. The widower died the following spring, and the property transfer that followed was disputed by his children for 2 years before they ran out of money to fight it. Gerald stared at her. Mrs. Aldwell has connections in Bath. Who knew the solicitor? Nora said. He spoke to them before he died. He believed Miss Vance had been working with someone who understood property law and estate documentation well enough to construct a transfer that looked legitimate from the outside. And my cousin, Gerald said slowly, has invited this woman into his house and left her near his archive room. He has not left her near it intentionally, Nora said. He does not know she was there. Does he know about Hampshire? I do not believe so. Gerald folded Mrs. Aldwell's letter and put it inside his coat. Where is Cavendish now? Riding the North Fields with Mr. Potts. He returns at noon. And Miss Vance? In the Rose guest room, as far as Agnes can confirm. Gerald looked at her steadily. You have managed this house for 4 years, he said. You have kept this information, gathered it, organized it, and handed it to me in under 5 minutes. Why have you not taken it directly to my cousin yourself? It was a fair question, and she had known it would come. She had been preparing her answer since the Morning Post arrived. Because the Duke of Grenwall will receive this information differently, depending on who brings it, she said. If it comes from me, he will hear it as a household concern raised by his estate manager. If it comes from you, he will hear it as a family matter, requiring his immediate attention. One of those will make him act. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then something moved across his face that was close to respect, though she suspected he did not give that particular thing away easily. Miss Blythe, he said, my aunt chose extraordinarily well. He went upstairs to refresh himself before lunch, and Nora went to the kitchen to tell Mrs. Hale there would be an additional place at the dining table, and to tell Thomas to ensure Samuel kept close watch on the corridor near the archive room for the rest of the day. She was back at her desk by 10 o'clock. At 11, Cecilia came to find her. She did not knock. She opened the office door with the easy authority of someone who had already decided the space belonged to her, in some way that had not yet been made official. She was dressed precisely, and her dark hair was arranged without a single strand out of place, and she stood in the doorway of Nora's office and smiled with her mouth, while her eyes did something entirely different. Miss Blythe, she said, I think it is time we spoke properly. Nora set down her pen. Please sit down, Miss Vance. Something shifted in Cecilia's expression, very slightly, at the use of her name. She had not expected Nora to know it. She sat in the chair across the desk and crossed her hands in her lap and maintained her smile. I imagine my presence here has made your position somewhat complicated, she said. Her voice was smooth and carefully modulated, every word placed with intention. My position is clear, Nora said. I manage the Grenwall household at the direction of the Duke. That has not changed. Not yet, Cecilia said pleasantly. Nora looked at her without expression. Is there a household matter I can assist you with, Miss Vance? Cecilia tilted her head. I want you to understand that I have nothing against you personally, Miss Blythe. You have done this work well. The Duke has said so himself. A pause, deliberate, and waited. But you must understand that the shape of this household is going to change. It would be better for you if you began to prepare for that. Nora said nothing. I am not asking you to leave, Cecilia continued. I am suggesting that a woman of your capability might find greater opportunity somewhere else. I could write you an excellent reference. The Duke would sign it without question. She let that sit in the air between them. The implication was obvious and complete. The Duke would sign what she put in front of him. She was already that certain of it. Nora picked up her pen. Thank you for coming, Miss Vance, she said, and returned to the document she had been working on. Cecilia stared at her for a moment. The smile did not waver. but something behind it hardened. She stood, straightened her skirt, and left without another word. Nora did not look up until she heard the footsteps disappear down the corridor. Then she sat back in her chair and breathed out once, slow and deliberate, and thought about what Cecilia had just told her, without meaning to. She was not guessing at her hold over the Duke. She was certain of it, which meant either the Duke was genuinely without awareness of what this woman was, or he had made a choice that nothing in his character across 4 years had prepared Nora to believe he would make. She needed to know which one it was before noon. She went to find Frederick. He was in the library, which was where he always retreated when the house felt tense. She closed the door behind her and told him about the visit in 4 sentences. Frederick's face went through 3 expressions in quick succession. Then he stood up. "Gerald needs to speak to Cavendish the moment he returns from the fields," he said. "Yes," Nora agreed. "And Frederick." She paused. "Whatever the Duke decides after Gerald speaks to him, I need you to know that I have a letter ready to send to Lady Merton of Summerfield Park." Frederick looked at her for a long moment. His expression was not surprising. It was something heavier than that. "How long have you been preparing to leave?" "I have been prepared," she said carefully. "Whether I leave depends on what happens this afternoon." He nodded slowly. He did not try to talk her out of it. He did not offer reassurances about the Duke's character, or his better nature, or any of the comfortable things people say when they do not want to accept that someone they respect has been treated without respect. He simply nodded, and that restraint meant more to her than any words would have. She went back to her office and waited for noon. The Duke came back from the North Fields at 12:10, with mud on his boots and the particular settled look of a man who had spent a productive morning outdoors and expected a peaceful afternoon. He found Gerald waiting for him in the study. Nora was not in the room. She did not need to be. She had given Gerald everything he needed, and she trusted him to use it without decoration. She stayed at her desk and worked through the afternoon farm correspondence and listened to the house around her. At 12:30, she heard raised voices from the direction of the study. Not clearly. The walls were too thick for that, but the tone was unmistakable. Gerald's voice, steady and insistent. The Duke's voice, sharper than she had heard it in a long time, and then quieter, and then quiet altogether. At 1 o'clock, Thomas appeared in her doorway. "His Grace is asking for you, Miss Blythe." She took a breath. Then she walked to the study. Both Gerald and Frederick were there. Gerald stood near the window. Frederick sat in the chair near the fire, with his arms folded. The Duke stood in the center of the room, and he looked like a man who had been shown something in a mirror he had not known was there. He looked at her when she entered. Gerald had shown him Mrs. Aldwell's letter. She could tell from the way it sat on the desk between them, unfolded, weighted down with nothing, because no one had thought to find a paperweight. "You knew," the Duke said. "I received the letter this morning," Nora said. "You went to Bath for this information." "I wrote to a contact in Bath, yes." He looked at the letter on the desk. The Hampshire estate, the solicitor, the deed transfer. He looked back at her. "You gathered all of this." "Someone needed to," she said. It came out quieter than she intended, but she did not take it back. He looked away briefly, toward the fire, and she saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. Gerald was watching them both. "I will ask her to leave today," the Duke said. "I think that would be wise," Gerald said from the window. "The archive room will need to be checked," Frederick said from his chair. "Thoroughly. Rowe should look at the deed documentation before he goes north." "Yes," the Duke said. He was still looking at Nora. "I owe you an explanation," he said. She said nothing. She waited. He moved to the desk and stood behind it, not sitting, just standing, with his hand resting on the surface, the way she had seen him stand 100 times in this room. "Cecilia Vance came to me 6 months ago, through a mutual connection in London. I was told she was the widow of a minor landowner from the West Country who had fallen on difficult circumstances. She was charming, and she was clever, and I was," he paused, not careful about examining what I was choosing to believe. He looked at the desk. "I am not going to tell you that excuses anything." It did not excuse anything. She did not say so aloud, because he had already said it himself. She asked to come to Grenwall 2 weeks ago, he continued. She said she wished to understand the estate she might one day be connected to. His voice was even and factual, and beneath it was something she recognized as shame, because she had a precise and experienced ear for the things men said in careful tones when they did not want to fully expose what they felt. I told her she could come for 1 week. I did not tell the household, because I had not decided what I was going to do, and I did not want to make a decision under the pressure of everyone knowing I had not yet made one. Nora looked at him steadily. And the note she sent to my office, he met her eyes. I did not know about that. The breakfast list she gave Agnes, I did not know. The archive room at 11:30 at night, I did not know. A man who does not know what is happening inside his own house, because he has not bothered to look, is not innocent. He is absent. And absent, Nora had learned long ago, was its own form of damage. Gerald spoke from the window. She needs to be gone before this evening, Cavendish, and Rowe needs to see those deed files before anyone touches that archive room again. The Duke nodded without looking away from Nora. Gerald and Frederick exchanged a look and left the room. The door closed. Nora and the Duke of Grenwall stood on opposite sides of his desk in the study, where they had met every week for 4 years, and the silence between them was nothing like their usual silences. I called you old cargo, he said. Her breath did not change. Her expression did not change, but something in her chest pulled tight and then went very still. I did not think anyone could hear, he said. That is not an excuse. It is simply the truth of how carelessly I spoke, and I understand that carelessness about a person is its own kind of cruelty. She looked at him across the desk. You said it easily, she said. That is what I keep thinking about. Not that you said it, that it came easily. He did not flinch from that. He held it. Yes, he said quietly. I have managed every part of this estate for 4 years, she said. I have protected your accounts and your staff and the reputation of this house. I found out in 3 days what your mistress was doing inside these walls while you were riding your North Fields. And in 6 months of knowing that woman, you never once looked at her the way you have never once looked at me. She stopped. She had not meant to say that much, but she had said it, and she was not going to retreat from it. The Duke looked at her with sadness. You have a letter ready to send to Lady Merton, he said. She stared at him. How do you know that? Frederick did not tell me the name, he said. I am asking, because the look on your face when you walked into this room told me you had already decided something before you came through the door, and the only thing that would make you look like that is the knowledge that you have somewhere else to go. He paused. Do you? She held his gaze. Yes. He nodded slowly. He looked at the desk. I am not going to ask you to stay, he said. That would be one more thing I have no right to ask of you. He looked up. But I am asking you to hear this, not because it changes what I said or what I failed to see, because it is true, and you deserve to hear it. He straightened. You are not cargo, Nora. You are the most capable and honest person in this house, and I have treated that like furniture for 4 years, and I am sorry for it. She stood very still. He had used her given name. In 4 years he had never used her given name. She looked at him for a long moment. The fire behind her was warm, and the light was beginning to thin toward late afternoon, and outside the window she could hear the distant sound of Cecilia Vance's voice, giving some instruction to someone in the courtyard below, not yet knowing that her time at Grenwall was already finished. I will stay through the end of the month, she said, to ensure the transition is orderly and the Alderton matter is properly resolved with Rowe. Thank you, he said. She nodded once and left the study. In the corridor, she walked past the drawing room where she had stood 4 nights ago, with a candle in her hand, and heard the thing that had changed everything. She did not pause this time. She walked back to her office and sat at her desk and looked at the letter to Lady Merton in her open drawer. She did not send it that afternoon, but she did not put it away either. Cecilia Vance was gone before 6 o'clock. Gerald supervised it personally, with Thomas managing the trunks, and Samuel standing straight-backed near the front door, with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this since Tuesday. There was no scene. Cecilia left the way she had arrived, precisely and deliberately, except this time she did not look at anyone as she went. Not at Gerald, not at the Duke, who stood at the top of the staircase and watched the front doors close, not at Nora, who stood near the corridor entrance with her hands clasped and her expression completely neutral. The house breathed differently after she was gone. Mrs. Hale made the Sunday almond cake that evening, though it was Thursday, because she said the house deserved it. Kit brought fresh straw into the stable, with more energy than the task required. Agnes hummed something under her breath in the upstairs corridor, stopped when she realized Nora could hear her, and then continued when Nora said nothing. The Duke did not come to dinner. Frederick ate with Nora in the small dining room, which was not protocol, and which neither of them remarked upon. He ate Mrs. Hale's soup, and talked about the Alderton boundary matter, and the journey north, and whether the roads would hold in the coming week, and Nora answered him with the same steady attention she gave everything, and neither of them mentioned the study, or the letter, or what the end of the month meant. Before he went to bed, Frederick paused at the dining room door and said, without turning, "He has not been a fool about most things, only the things that mattered." She said nothing. He said good night and went upstairs. Nora sat alone at the small dining table with her tea and thought about that, about the things that matter, about whether a man who is a fool about the things that matter has any real claim to the goodwill of the person he has failed to see. She did not have an answer. She was not sure the answer was hers to give alone. The Duke of Grenwall had spoken a careless word in the dark to a woman who had come into his house to take everything he had not been paying attention to. He had not seen what was happening under his own roof. He had kept his estate manager in the dark about a guest who was sending her notes about household changes. He had called her cargo and meant it to go unheard, which was perhaps the most honest version of what he actually thought, unchecked and unperformed. And then, when everything came apart, she had been the one to hold it together, again, the same way she had been holding it together for 4 years, invisibly and without thanks, the way the most essential things are always held together by the people least likely to be noticed doing it. The fire in the small dining room burned low. She finished her tea and looked out the dark window at the Grenwall grounds, at the shapes of trees she had learned to know season by season, at the stone garden marker near the east wall, where Kit still left wildflowers for a duchess 4 years gone. She thought about whether Cavendish Grenwall deserved forgiveness. She did not know yet, and she was not going to decide tonight. And the letter to Lady Merton was going to stay in her desk drawer for a little while longer, not because she had forgiven him, but because she had not finished deciding what she wanted, and for the first time in 4 years, what she wanted was the question she was going to put first. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and took her candle from the table. She walked back through the quiet house toward the east wing, past the drawing room, past the archive room with its locked door and its key in her pocket, past the corridor, where everything had started 4 nights ago, with a sound she was never supposed to hear. The Duke of Grenwall had a great deal yet to prove. Whether he was capable of proving it, whether he even understood the full size of what he had to prove, she genuinely did not know. What she knew was this: she was still here, and she had chosen to be. For now, that was enough. Just barely, but enough. Now, I want to ask you something before you go. Do you think the Duke of Grenwall deserves Nora's forgiveness after everything she heard, everything she carried, and everything she fixed while he looked straight through her? Or has he used up every chance a man like him gets? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I will be going through every single comment, and I will be replying.